You're nothing but a broke paramedic, and that mechanic husband of yours can't even afford a decent suit. My mother spat that across the kitchen island, her eyes raking over my EHS uniform like she'd found gum on her shoe. She reached over, snatched the cream envelope right out of my hands, and dropped it into the sink, twisting the tap on until the gold lettering bled into nothing. Priya is marrying into the Sinclair family. Tomorrow there'll be lawyers, surgeons, half the Bay Street crowd in that ballroom. She tipped her chin up like she was already rehearsing how to stand near money. I will not have them see that my daughter rides around in an ambulance smelling like rubbing alcohol. You'll embarrass us. Stay home. I stood there with my back teeth locked together so hard my jaw ached. 12 years of paramedic work, car wrecks, overdoses, the things I've pulled out of burning vehicles and collapsed basements. None of it had ever cut as deep as my own mother's voice doing it on purpose. I straightened my jacket, took my husband Callum's hand, the one with the grease permanently worked into the creases of his knuckles, and we walked out of that house. I accepted the exile right there on the porch mat. What she didn't know was that 3 hours after her precious $30,000 wedding reception got underway, a black government SUV with federal plates would roll up our street in Scarborough, and the woman stepping out of it would say 6 words that flipped everything she thought she understood about her own daughter. Hit subscribe before you go any further, because what happens at that reception is something nobody in my family saw coming, and I want you here for all of it. Let me back up to where this actually started. That morning, my mother had the guest list spread across the dining table like a battle map, her manicured finger tracing names she'd clearly memorized off the society pages. Her eyes landed on my navy EHS jacket folded over the chair, and her nose wrinkled like she'd caught a whiff of the ambulance bay. She didn't ask. She just reached over and pulled the wedding invitation clean out of my fingers. It slid off the table and landed face down on the hardwood. Then she did something I will never be able to unsee. She lifted her heel, those expensive tout pumps she'd bought specifically for this wedding season, and pressed it slowly into the middle of that card. One deliberate twist of her ankle. The message didn't need translating. Your place is beneath this family, and you'll stay there. I didn't yell. Didn't slam a single fist on that table. 12 years of staying calm while someone's chest isn't moving teaches you something about your own pulse. I breathed in for 4 counts, held it, let it go for 4. My eyes slid sideways to the leather love seat where my younger sister Priya sat filing her nails, not even bothering to look up. The corner of her mouth curled into something that wasn't quite a smile but did the same job. She didn't need to say anything. That little smirk was her signature on the whole eviction notice. Beside me, Callum sat completely still. His hands, the ones permanently stained with engine grease, no matter how hard he scrubbed, the ones with the scar across 2 knuckles from when a timing belt snapped on him 3 years back, gripped the arm of the chair until his knuckles went pale. The quiet in that room was the kind that presses on your eardrums. My mother wasn't finished. She jabbed a ring-heavy finger toward the little EHS pin on my collar. Your sister starved herself into a size 2 to land a man like Marcus Sinclair. Don't you dare use your little essential worker badge to fish for sympathy at her wedding. Every word landed like a slap because she was scrubbing away a truth she couldn't risk anyone finding out. The overtime money I'd quietly wired to her 3 winters ago when the furnace died in February and she was too proud to ask anyone but me. Money I'd earned doing back-to-back 16-hour shifts through a Toronto winter had paid for the boiler that kept this house warm. And she repaid it by telling people I lived off government checks. I'd had enough. I pushed my chair back and stood up straight, the way you do when you walk into a scene you can't predict the ending of. I looked her dead in the eye and used the voice I saved for telling a family someone isn't coming home. Flat, no wasted air. You're right, Mom. My paramedic ID and the burn scar on Callum's forearm are worth more than every overpriced invitation in this house. Congratulations. I took Callum's hand and we left. The door clicked shut behind us, not slammed, just shut, and that small, quiet sound severed something I'd been holding on to since I was a kid. Callum didn't talk until we hit the driveway. He opened my door, walked around, got in, started the truck. The old Silverado coughed twice before it caught, same as it always did in October. You good? 2 words. That was Callum's whole emotional vocabulary most days, and somehow it always said more than a paragraph from anyone else. I didn't answer right away. I was looking at his hands on the wheel, the scarring along his right forearm from the garage fire 2 years back, when a fuel line ignited under a lift and he didn't get clear fast enough, pulling his apprentice out from under the car. Skin grafts, 11 weeks off work, and he was back turning wrenches before Christmas. He never told anyone outside the shop. I only knew because I was the one who picked him up from Sunnybrook that night. The truck rattled down Lawrence Avenue, and a memory hit me sideways, the way they do when you're not braced for it. I was 17, standing in that same kitchen, holding an acceptance letter to the paramedic program at Centennial College. My mother took it out of my hands, tore it down the middle, and fed both halves into the gas fireplace. Priya just borrowed $4,000 for pageant headshots, she said, not even looking at me. You're going to pick up shifts at the diner and pay it back. Then she pressed one finger hard into my forehead, right between my eyebrows. You've got your father's eyes. I won't let his bad luck infect this family. My father, Desmond, was a millwright who fixed industrial equipment at a plant out in Mississauga for $22 an hour, 6 days a week most winters. His hands always smelled like cutting oil. Every night he came home, he'd sit me on the workbench in the garage while he finished whatever he was working on. And he taught me how to read a torque spec, how to listen for the difference between a bearing that's fine and one that's about to seize. He taught me that things built carefully with your own hands carry something money can't buy. He died when I was 8. A hoist chain failed at the plant, and he was underneath it. My mother got rid of every photo of him within a year, replaced the story with something about us having old Montreal money 2 generations back, a lie she'd been polishing ever since, and a lie she needed Priya to wear like a designer label. That night at 17, I packed 2 duffel bags and took the bus down to the recruiting office for the paramedic program intake. The advisor looked at my red eyes and didn't ask a single question, just slid the enrollment forms across the counter. The cruelty repeated itself at my own wedding 4 years ago. Callum stood at the front in his good shirt, pressed, and a little too tight at the collar, surrounded by 6 guys from the shop who still smelled faintly of brake cleaner and clapped him on the back like family. No champagne tower, no string quartet, just a backyard, some string lights, and my aunt's homemade butter tarts. My mother sat in the front row dabbing at dry eyes, and I heard her whisper to my aunt beside her, "She married a grease monkey with no pension. She's dragging this whole family down with her." She'd come by our apartment a month before that, run a finger along the counter like a building inspector, turned to Callum's and said, right in front of me, "I hope you understand marrying my daughter is the only good investment you'll ever make." Callum didn't say a word. He picked up his work boots off the mat and left for his shift. The dent he later punched into our drywall told me everything his silence wouldn't. It never stopped. A year ago, I was on a 12-hour overnight shift, 3rd call in a row, hands still shaking from a pediatric cardiac arrest we'd worked the whole way to sick kids. My fuzzed in the rig. Not a "you okay?" Not a "how was your shift?" My mother's voice, sharp through the static of the ambulance bay. She wanted me to co-sign a line of credit so Priya could afford a Cartier bracelet for some Sinclair family dinner. If she doesn't look the part, she'll lose him, and we'll lose everything. I told her no. I told her I wasn't turning hazard pay and 12-hour overnights into jewelry for a man who'd never once asked my name. She called me an ungrateful daughter and hung up. Back in the truck that day, I ran my thumb over the small wooden pendant tucked in my coat pocket, the one my father carved out of a scrap of maple the week I was born, sanded smooth, the only thing of his my mother never managed to throw out because I never let it out of my sight. And I made a quiet promise to myself in that cab. Not one more tear for people hiding behind the word family. What my mother never knew, what nobody in that house knew, was what happened 3 years earlier on a stretch of Highway 401 outside Cobourg. I was working a transfer shift, moving a patient between hospitals, when we came up on a multi-vehicle pileup in freezing rain. Visibility was nothing. A sedan had gone under a jackknife transport truck and was on fire, fuel pooling underneath it, and the dispatcher's voice in my ear was crystal clear. Hold position, wait for fire suppression, do not approach an active fire. Through the windshield wipers, I could see a hand pressed against the cracked back window of that burning sedan. An old man's hand, fingers spread, pushing with whatever strength he had left. I grabbed the extinguisher off our rig, and I ran. Every protocol in my training screamed at me to stay back. The calculus was simple and brutal. One paramedic with a handheld extinguisher against a fully involved vehicle fire on a closed highway was a bad bet for everyone, but the calculus doesn't account for a hand on glass. I sprayed a path through the worst of it, smashed the rear window with the extinguisher's base, and pulled a white-haired man out through the frame by his collar and shoulders just as the front of the car went up properly behind us. We were maybe 15 feet clear when the fuel tank let go. The shockwave knocked us both down onto wet asphalt. I covered him with my own body as debris came down. A piece of trim sliced across my shoulder, 6 stitches worth, and I didn't feel it until an hour later in the ambulance bay. I worked on him for 19 minutes on that shoulder before a second crew got through the wreckage to us, applying pressure to a head wound, talking to him, keeping him conscious, refusing to let go of his hand even when they tried to load him. 2 days later, a man in a gray wool coat came to the hospital where I'd been treated for the stitches and the smoke exposure. He set an envelope on my bedside table that I never opened and told me there'd be a commendation with my name on it from the province. I asked them to keep my name out of any press release. I followed the only instinct I had. Do the job, don't make it about you. The man I'd pulled out of that car, I only learned his identity from the incident report weeks later. Gerald Ashcombe, former Deputy Minister of Finance for Ontario, and one of the most connected private equity figures on Bay Street, the kind of man whose phone calls move pension funds. My mother spent the 3 years since calling me a glorified bus driver. She had no idea the daughter she'd been spitting on for a decade was carrying a secret that could rearrange the entire social order she'd spent her life trying to climb into. The morning of Priya's wedding, while 400 guests in silk and tailored suits gathered at a vineyard estate out near Niagara-on-the-Lake, I drove somewhere else entirely. I put on my dress uniform, the formal navy one we wear maybe twice a year, and drove out to the memorial wall at our base, the one with the names of paramedics who didn't come home from a call. I stood in front of one name I visit every fall, Constable Theo Marsh, EHS, killed responding to a structure collapse 11 years back, 26 years old. His mother still mails me a Christmas card with a photo of his daughter, born 5 months after he died. I knelt, brushed a few dead leaves off the base of the plaque, and pressed 2 fingers against the engraved letters. Cold metal, that's what it feels like, touching what people actually sacrifice, compared to what gets called sacrifice at a 400-guest wedding. Behind me, a cane tapped against the gravel path. I didn't need to turn around. Retired Staff Sergeant Yvonne Drummond, 71, came out here every week she could manage, rain or shine, ever since she lost her partner on a call back in the 90s. Your shoulders are squared but your breathing's off, Maeve. That's what she called me, no last name, just the way she always had. Ambushed, I told her, by my own mother. The words came out the way they do in a report, flat. Yvonne planted her cane in the dirt, reached up, and unclasped a small silver medallion she'd worn on a chain for 30 years. Her partner's, the one who didn't make it, and pressed it into my palm. It was cold as anything. That's what the job actually costs, Maeve. Your mother couldn't lift that weight with both hands. She tapped 2 knuckles against my chest, right over my heart. Honor doesn't need her permission. Stand tall. My phone buzzed. A photo from Callum, a delivery box sitting on our front steps with a card taped to the lid. I couldn't read the words in the thumbnail, but I didn't need to. Even from a vineyard 2 hours away, she was still swinging. I straightened my spine the way you do walking into a multi-casualty scene, every ounce of self-pity from being disowned by my own blood pushed somewhere I could deal with it later. I thanked Yvonne, walked back to my car and drove home. By 3 in the afternoon, our small house in Scarborough sat in that particular kind of quiet that feels loud. The local news was running a segment on the Sinclair Patel wedding, drone footage sweeping over a vineyard estate, Priya floating across the frame in a dress someone on the broadcast called hand-beaded, easily 6 figures. My mother orbited the head table, refilling wine for people whose net worth she couldn't have guessed correctly within $10 million. I sat at our kitchen table with my service radio and a coffee gone cold, half listening, half not. There's champagne towers and string quartets on that screen, and on this side of the city, a dripping kitchen tap and the faint smell of brake cleaner still clinging to the coveralls hanging by the back door. A hard knock hit our front door. Callum, still in his work pants from a half day at the shop, opened it. A courier in a black cap dropped an insulated white box on the step without a word and walked off before Callum could even say anything. He picked it up, taped to the lid, a card in red ink. He read it out loud, his voice flattening as he went. This is leftover lobster from tonight's dinner. Sending it so your unemployed husband can taste what real success smells like. Stay where you belong. My mother's signature, that dramatic looping M slashed underneath. Callum looked at that note for about 3 seconds. Then he carried the box out back, lifted the lid on our bin, and dropped it in. The lid banged shut like a gavel. He came back inside, sat down across from me, picked up a rag, and started cleaning the kitchen counter that didn't need cleaning. Neither of us said anything. There wasn't anything left to say. You can't insult your way into someone's dignity with leftover lobster. We sat like that for almost 20 minutes. Then the TV signal glitched for half a second, and at the exact same moment, the floor under us picked up a low vibration. Heavy engines, more than one vehicle, coming down our quiet residential street far too fast for a Tuesday afternoon. Callum was up before I was. He crossed to the window, pulled the curtain back 2 inches, and went pale in a way I'd never seen on him, not even after the fire. Maeve. His voice dropped to something I only ever heard him use on the worst calls at the shop. These aren't here for a noise complaint. They're pointed straight at our door. I walked out onto the porch with my hands loose at my sides. 2 black SUVs with government plates were already angled across our driveway, boxing the property in. 6 people in dark suits, earpieces, the kind of posture you only get from federal training, stepped out in unison. The lead agent broke off and walked toward me. Mid-50s, a thin scar along her jaw, the kind that doesn't come from an accident. She stopped 2 steps from the porch, Maeve Calloway. Her voice was even, no room for negotiation in it. Correct, I said, holding her eyes. She gave a single nod. Ottawa knows who you are. There's someone who's requested your presence at an event currently in progress. She opened a leather wallet, the gold crest catching the afternoon light. I narrowed my eyes. The timing wasn't lost on me. Federal agents at my door on the exact afternoon of my sister's wedding, 2 hours away. Either an enormous coincidence or a thread I hadn't seen yet. The lead agent took one step closer and lowered her voice. Operation File, Highway 401, 3 years ago. 3 years of lockdown memory detonated behind my eyes in a single second. The rain, the burning sedan, the hand on the glass, 19 minutes of pressure on a man's skull. I knew exactly who'd sent her and exactly why. "Give me 5 minutes," I said, and went inside. I found my dress uniform in the back of the closet, behind Callum's coveralls and my old jackets, pressed it with my hands flat against the creases, and put it on piece by piece the way you do a pre-shift check. By the time I looked at myself in the hallway mirror, the woman looking back wasn't the one who'd swallowed insults in her mother's kitchen that morning. Callum stood in the doorway watching me get dressed. He didn't ask where, didn't ask why, he just nodded once. That single nod held more trust than anything anyone in my family had ever said to me out loud. The drive out to Niagara-on-the-Lake took just under an hour, with the convoy running lights the whole way. Civilian traffic peeling off to the shoulder like we were something out of a different kind of afternoon. We turned onto a private lane lined with old maples, and the vineyard's security detail scrambled to drag the gate open the second the lead agent held up her badge out the window. We didn't slow down once. Tires crunched across the gravel drive, around a stone fountain throwing water into the late sun, and right across the red carpet laid out for the wedding guests. A server dropped an entire tray of champagne flutes, glass shattering across the patio stones like a starting pistol. The string quartet stopped mid-bar. Every head on that terrace turned at once. I stepped out. My shoes hit the flagstone, and the late light caught every bit of brass on my chest. I walked through the crescent of agents at a measured pace, the way you walk into a scene when you already know what you're going to find. I found my mother's table without trying. Her face had gone the color of wet drywall. Her hand shook hard enough that the glass she was holding slipped and broke at her feet. Priya sat frozen, the tiara on her head listing sideways, face drained gray. Marcus Sinclair, the groom, half rose out of his chair, sweat already darkening the collar of his tux. They understood. The daughter they'd humiliated with leftover lobster and a card in red ink had just walked back into their lives with a federal escort. The crowd parted for a white-haired man, walking slowly through the gap, leaning on a cane, his back straight despite it. Gerald Ashcombe, the man whose calls moved pension funds, whose name people on Bay Street said like it cost something just to say it out loud. I came to attention and gave him a full salute. He didn't salute back. He let his cane drop, stepped forward, took both of my hands in his, and his voice, deep and pitched to carry, rolled clean across that terrace. "Maeve Calloway, Ontario owes you. I personally owe you my life." 400 guests went dead silent. Ashcombe turned toward the head table, and his expression changed entirely. He crossed the patio, planted his cane, and looked straight at my mother. "This afternoon, you told me, she was working an out-of-province posting and couldn't make it. You banned the woman who pulled me out of a burning car from this property." He leaned in. "Did you think I wouldn't find out you remortgaged your house to a private lender to build your other daughter's whole social profile? That you dressed her up to land a man under false pretenses?" My mother's composure went to pieces in real time. "Sir, you don't understand. I was protecting her safety." Ashcombe cut her off cold. "Don't." Marcus turned slowly toward Priya, and the look on his face wasn't anger. It was the specific look of a man realizing he doesn't know the person he just married. Ashcombe straightened and told the whole terrace what had happened on the 401 3 years earlier. The fire, the closed highway, 19 minutes with his blood on my hands, the commendation I never accepted, the report I asked to be sealed. Marcus sat down hard in the nearest chair, doing the math on every story he'd been told about old family money and a generous older sister bankrolling her struggling sibling. Priya tried to speak. 3 syllables came out, something like Marcus's name and then nothing. She looked at our mother. Our mother looked at the floor. Neither of them had a single word left. Ashcombe took the microphone from the stunned bandleader and let his voice carry across the whole vineyard. "You can price anything in this room. Stocks, real estate, a wedding venue." He let it sit. "You will never, not in 100 years, afford the integrity of this woman." 400 people stood up at once. The applause didn't build slowly, it just happened, all at once, glassware rattling on every table. I stood in the light, hands behind my back, and let it land on my mother and my sister like something they'd never be able to wash off. If watching people finally answer for the lies they built their lives on does something for you too, hit that like button and tell me in the comments. Has someone in your own family ever shown their true colors in front of everyone? I stepped away from the handshakes and found the second-floor balcony of the main house. Below, the lake caught the last orange strip of light. I put both hands on the stone railing and let my chest finally drop like I'd been holding my breath for 12 hours. Behind me, the slow, uneven click of heels. My mother first, the woman who'd ground her heel into my invitation that morning. Shoulders caved in now, mascara tracked down both cheeks. Maeve, her voice cracked. I was wrong. I'm sorry. Please, talk to him for us. The bank's calling the loan. We're going to lose the house. I've lost everything. I didn't turn around. Priya came next, grabbing my sleeve with both hands, knuckles white, tiara gone. I told Marcus I was the one sending you money, that I was the one carrying you. If he finds out I drained your overtime to build all this, he'll leave me. You have to fix it. There it was. She hadn't just taken my money. She'd taken my whole story and rewritten herself as the generous one and me as the charity case. I pulled my sleeve out of her grip. She stumbled back against the railing. When I finally spoke, the words came out slow and packed tight. You're not crying because you feel sorry for what you did to me. You're crying because your money's on fire. I took one step forward, and they both flinched. Where I work, when someone turns on the person beside them, that's it. No appeal. I forgive you both as blood. But whatever was left between us died the morning you put your heel through my invitation. My mother reached for my hand. I stepped back. Go put out the fire you started yourselves. I turned and walked off that balcony and didn't look back once. I declined the dinner invitation that evening, rode home alone, and when I came through our front door, still in dress uniform, Callum was standing in our narrow kitchen with a smear of grease still on his forearm from that morning's shift. He saw me and the corner of his mouth lifted, just one side, the smile that's gotten me through every bad shift I've ever had. He opened his arms and I crossed the kitchen in 3 steps. His shirt smelled like the shop, like metal and motor oil, nothing fancy about it at all, and I stood there with my eyes closed, listening to his heartbeat and knew, with a kind of certainty that doesn't need explaining, that I was the wealthiest woman in this city. The aftermath wrote itself in red ink, same as that card. Marcus's lawyers filed for an annulment within the week once the prenup's fraud clause activated. Priya walked away with nothing. Not the condo, not the car, not a cent of it. My mother's house went to the bank a month later, the private loan she'd taken out to build Priya's whole image finally come due, with no one left to bail her out. She texted me every Sunday for a while, long messages about forgiveness and second chances that always circled back to the same request. Call Ashcombe. Fix this. I never opened a single one. I blocked the number and set the phone face down on the counter. Cutting a tumor out of your own life, even one that shares your blood, is the hardest thing you'll ever do to yourself. It's also the only way you keep breathing. Callum poured me coffee the next morning, black, in the chipped mug I like, and we sat at that same kitchen table where I'd packed my gear a day earlier, drinking in silence while the first light came through the window over the sink. No champagne tower, no string quartet, just 2 people who'd earned every square inch of the quiet around them. The strongest person in any room isn't the one sitting at the head table judging everyone else's worth. It's the one who refuses to kneel, even when the blade in their back came from their own family. If this gave you something to sit with today, hit subscribe and tell me down in the comments, would you have walked back into that wedding the way I did?